All right, good morning, everybody. We are here to discuss the American Rescue Plan State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which I'm probably just going to call ARP or ARP. And today we're going to focus on risk assessments, grants, and budgets, and how to perform the related processes in our new software. Sorry, my PowerPoint is not advancing slides. Might have to do it in non-presentation mode, folks. All right. So can everybody see the presentation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And those of you who aren't familiar with WebEx, you can zoom in. There's a little guide and you can zoom in if you need to. So Louisville Metro government is moving to a new software system. Its name for us is the Louisville Metro Government Grants Management System, but the software itself is called GovGrants, and we've been calling it GovGrants for a year now, so it's going to be hard for me to call it anything but. And we did an exhaustive search of software systems to find something that met the criteria that we wanted. One, we wanted it to be user-friendly. We don't want to overburden our grantees. Number two, we wanted it to manage the entire life cycle of grants, and most of them don't, which is amazing to me. And then we also wanted one that was going to have a fairly quick learning process. So not only is it easy to use out of the box, but the trickier things are still pretty easy to use. So after that search, we chose GovGrants. It was the only one that met all of those criteria. And we've gotten GovGrants from a company called REI Systems. They've been our partner on this whole process. They're a technology company that provides application moderation, grants management system, and other grants management products, government data analytics, and advisory services that help governments meet the demands of the 21st century. And I will tell you, I finally feel like Metro government has met the 21st century now that we have GovGrants. We've got David Dabb from REI here as one of our trainers today. He's a business analyst at REI Systems, and he's got 10 years of grant experience. He's worked with us hand in hand since early this year. He led the gap analysis efforts and was the functional lead of the project. He guided a team of other members through the implementation phase, and he's going to show you how to actually perform these functions in GovGrants. And he's a great trainer. I just have to say, I've spent a lot of time with David over the last several months, and he's taught me a great deal. I'm Susan Durham. I mean it, David. I'm Susan Durham. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at American Rescue Plan. My bio is up on the screen. I'm not going to read about myself, but it's there if you want to read it. So because we know that there's going to be a learning curve for some of these processes, and we know technical issues happen, we also have a wide range of grantees under the American Rescue Plan. We have grantees that have never received federal funds before, and we have grantees who are experts who get $200 million a year in federal funds every year. So it's a wide range. We know that we need to support everybody across that spectrum, but some people are going to need more support than others. So if you need tech support, we're going to ask you to contact GovGrantsOMB at louisvilleky.gov. And I'm going to send out this PowerPoint so you'll have all this information. We also have a website that has training videos and a user guide where you can, if you want to amend your grant award, you can go and watch the amendment video or you can look in the user guide how to amend your grant. Going forward, you'll also be able to book time with our system administrator. So if you're having a technical problem, but you're not the kind of person who wants to handle things via email, you can go on and schedule time with our system admin and take care of that problem in a meeting. And then our OMB compliance team can also meet with you to walk you through different processes from the grants perspective, really, rather than the technicals perspective. For instance, if you don't understand some of the questions in the risk assessment, we can meet with you and complete those risk assessment questions together. We can help you do your first couple reimbursement request. We can help you with whatever you want. You can either email me directly or you can send an email to americanrescue@louisvilleky.gov and get assistance. So the first step your organization has to take is registering in the grants management system. And the registration has to be completed by someone at your organization who has the ability to submit applications and accept awards on behalf of your organization. We are not going to tell you who that person is. We're going to let your organization make that decision. But we're not requiring you to have the person who signs your grant awards be that person. We know the person who signs your grant awards usually doesn't have time to fool with the software system. And so if it needs to be somebody, the CFO, the grants manager, somebody like that, you're welcome to make that decision. What you do not want to do, though, is have someone register who's only working on one grant program. You want it to be somebody who can speak for your organization as a whole. Because in the upcoming months, the software is going to roll out across Metro government, and the person who can accept your ARP grant is going to need to be able to accept your neighborhood development fund grant and your external agency fund grant and your HUD grant and every grant that your organization is going to get for many years. So once that person registers, they can invite other users from your organization to register. One person can manage everything if that's the way your organization operates. But if, say, the person who does programmatic steps is different from the person who's going to submit your reimbursement request, you're going to need both of those people to be working in GovGrants. Right now, we're capping people at 3 users, but some organizations are going to have multiple grant projects. They're going to have multiple users that they need to have access. So all you have to do is give us a quick email and we can make that user count however much you want. We're limiting it now because for everybody who registers, we're having to pay a license fee. And we don't want somebody to just say, oh, everybody sign up for this just in case you ever have to use it. But we do understand that for some organizations like Kentuckiana Works, 3 users probably isn't going to be enough. On our video help site, our resource site, we've got 2 videos up right now that will guide you through the registration process and inviting users. And if you want to get to the grants management system, the URL is just grants.louisvilleky.gov. It's just pretty easy. We ask that your organization be fully registered by the 2nd of September, which is next Friday a week. That's because we're going to start using GovGrants that week of Labor Day. So on Tuesday the 6th, I think is the date. Everything's going to be handled in GovGrants. If you're going to send us a reimbursement request, it needs to be through GovGrants. If you're going to accept your award, you're going to accept it in GovGrants. To help you with the registration, or if you're having problems with the risk assessment, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, We have office hours this week and next. I sent the links out to your organizations with the communication about these trainings. We have office hours tomorrow from 9 to 10:30, Friday afternoon this week, and then 2 days next week, Tuesday and Friday from 10 until noon. You can pop in, ask your question, and pop back out. You don't have to stay. During the office hours, I will be there, and so will our system administrator, Daniel Kalin. Daniel's here this morning. He's going to be the primary person to help you with technical questions, not just in the office hours, but going forward. He's been on board the last several weeks with GovGrants. He's got 15 years of information technology experience, and he's going to be great at helping you if you have technical problems. Daniel, did you want to say hi real quick?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, like Susan said, I mean, I'll be here to support y'all with any type of technical questions. We'll try to maintain regular office hours that you'll be able to book 30-minute sessions with me. We hope to have that set up in the next week or so. But yeah, I'm happy to be on board and happy to support any of the subrecipient organizations with your all's, technical questions and getting everybody on board.
So I should have mentioned at the beginning that you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions during this training. You also can write questions in chat. Because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see those questions very well, but Daniel or Dexter, if you would break in and ask me those questions as you see them. You can all, yes.
Now that you say that, I know that you've offered 2 different times for this training and the one that's next week.
Yes.
I invited both our CFO and our grants manager to this training. I don't see them here today, so I'm assuming they're the other session. When is the other session? Is it this week? Just so that I can highlight these hours. I've already sent some emails on who's doing registration and the accounts.
Sure. The other session is next Monday.
Okay.
Does David or Daniel, do you have that time handy? I've got my email closed too.
It's okay.
Yeah,
They'll
it's
be
next
there.
Monday at 1 p.m.
Okay, perfect. I'm assuming that's when they'll be there. I see you have some office hours before then, so they might want to get rolling before they actually go into it. So we shall see. That's all I had. Thank you so much.
Of course. And we do have session 2, during which we're going to cover the reimbursement request. And session 2 is going to be this Thursday morning from 9 to 12, or next Wednesday from 1 to 4. So we're going to talk just for a second about the American Rescue Plan. And American Rescue Plan was a big law that came out last spring of 2021, that authorized a lot of recovery programs, including one called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is what we call ARP. And under the ARP program, we are using funds for economic and health-related recovery of the Louisville metro area. We cannot do that without the partnership of external organizations like yours. And so that's why we are issuing grants to your organizations to help with this COVID recovery. It's important, before we go any further, that I remind everybody that grants are never a gift, ever. You should only accept ARP funds from Metro government if you're willing to adhere to all of the requirements, the federal regulations that are associated with the grant, and that you're wanting to work to produce a successful project. Now we're going to move on to risk assessments. I don't have a lot to tell you about risk assessments, so in just a couple of slides, we'll go into David's training on how to perform the risk assessments, but I'll tell you why we do risk assessments. There is a set of federal regulations called the Uniform Grant Guidance. It's the 2 CFR 200. I'll probably use that several times during this training. The 2 CFR 200 says we have to assess the risk of any grantees that are receiving federal funds from us. And risk means a couple of things. One, it means the risk of non-compliance from your organization. Non-compliance with federal regulations, non-compliance with Metro requirements and terms and conditions of your grant. But it also means the risk of the project not being completed. So we perform a risk assessment on every federal grantee that we have. And we determine a level: low risk, moderate risk, high risk. If your organization shows as high risk, that does not mean that we won't award you funds. It doesn't mean you're a bad organization. What it probably means is you've never managed federal funds, you've never managed this type of federal funds, you're a small organization, and this is new types of work for you. And so when we get that risk level, that tells Metro government several things. One, it tells us whether your organization is going to need additional technical assistance from Metro to be successful with your grant. It's going to tell us if we need to put additional terms and conditions in your grant agreement to help bring you up to a less risky level. And it's also going to tell us how deeply we need to monitor your grant. There are steps we have to take to monitor all grants. And if you're a higher risk grantee, we're going to monitor more regularly, more frequently, and we're probably going to look at more documents than we would if you were a low risk grantee. So Kentuckiana Works probably knows this. For ARP, starting last year, we began to use a questionnaire that we sent to grantees and prospective grantees and asked them to fill it out. And we used those questionnaire answers to conduct a risk assessment here at OMB. We're not using that questionnaire anymore. Instead, the risk assessment is going to take place inside GovGrants. So once you register your organization, you're going to get a notification that a risk assessment is due. I will tell you that GovGrants doesn't give you much time, just a couple of days before the due date of that risk assessment. Metro government doesn't mind if the risk assessment is late past that day. We're all learning the software. If it takes you all a couple of weeks to complete it, don't worry about it. The risk assessment has to be completed every year, but it covers every grant you get from Metro government. So you don't have to do it over and over again throughout the year if you want to apply for an external agency fund grant or a neighborhood development fund grant. You're good for a year. About 60 days before that year deadline, you're going to get a notification from GovGrants, a pending task that says, hey, in 2 months, your risk assessment is due, and you can prepare to complete the risk assessment. And I am going to turn it over to David to take over from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get rolling. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So in GovGrants, there are 2 types of risk assessments. There's the organizational risk assessment that happens at the entire organization level. So when you register in GovGrants, that's the first risk assessment that you'll take. That is a self-assessment that you will take. LMG doesn't get involved with that assessment at all. You go in, you answer some questions, you submit that questionnaire, and then the system, based on your answers to those questions, automatically scores and allocates you a risk level. And then LMG can just review that. So they don't need to approve it or anything like that. It's 100% just a self-assessment that your organization does. The second risk assessment that's available in GovGrants is the subaward level risk assessment. This takes place during the phase in the grants management lifecycle where you are going to be entering into a contract with LMG. So you're in the process of finalizing your budget, you're in the process of finalizing your scope. During that time, when you're finalizing that grant agreement with LMG, LMG may decide to conduct a subaward level risk assessment. Now that risk assessment, you don't need to take any action on. That's a risk assessment where LMG will go in and they'll fill out a questionnaire and then submit that. And then the system will automatically allocate a subaward risk level. So there's no involvement from you needed from there, but you'll be able to see the results of that risk assessment once it's complete. That way, if you're curious to know what LMG's answers are, or if you're curious to know what your risk level is, you'll be able to see that. And then just to kind of reiterate what Susan said, the goal of these assessments is to look for areas of risk where additional monitoring might be necessary. It's not to deter you from getting grant funding. It's to help LMG ensure that you're going to be in compliance, whether that be through additional monitoring if that's necessary, or through additional reporting if that's necessary, or whatever is necessary to help ensure that your organization is successful. It's not meant as a deterrent at all. So how this is going to work in GovGrants. I've got a small workflow diagram here to kind of walk through it. It's relatively straightforward from a process perspective. So for organizational risk assessments, which are the assessments that you're going to work on, there's two ways for that to get started. There's the automatic way, where the system will automatically create the risk assessment for you and then assign you a pending task. And then from there, you'll go in and you'll complete the assessment, and then the system will automatically score the risk and mark that assessment as active. The second way that a assessment can be started is you can manually request an ad hoc assessment out of cycle. So Susan mentioned that when you first register your organization, you'll be required to do an organization risk assessment. That still will take place and that will be automatically created for you. And then on an annual basis, the system will automatically create an assessment for you. So that way you can renew that assessment every year. If you make some major organizational changes in between that you feel are going to dramatically alter your risk assessment level, you can request an ad hoc assessment be done out of that annual cycle. When you request that additional assessment, that will go to LMG for approval. If LMG approves that request, you'll then be able to go in, complete that questionnaire, and submit your updated assessment. And then that will update your score based on how you updated the questionnaire. So it's a relatively straightforward process. Any questions so far?
Is there a list that details out what a major organizational change is?
I don't have one offhand, but as you work on the risk assessment, you'll be able to tell the main areas of the risk assessment, and we'll go over that shortly. If you make any changes in any of those major areas, those would be a really good grounds in order to request an out-of-cycle assessment. Any other questions so far before I dive in? Alrighty, let's jump right in then. Okay, so here is the GovGrants system. If you all haven't used this system before, let me go ahead and briefly give you a little bit of a tour, a little bit of a overall guide to how the system works. So when you log in for the first time, you'll be taken to this home tab here, and this is the home screen. On this home screen, you'll have access to a couple of dashboards here. This is to help you monitor any system pending tasks that you have. I'm currently logged in as a brand new organization. I just named them training user and I named it training organization. This is a brand new organization. I just registered into our test environment this morning. And you can see I've already got one pending task and it's due within the next 30 days. That is our organization risk assessment pending task. To access your pending task, you can either click on the number in one of these two dashboards, or you can go to your pending task directly from the left menu here. And when you click on that, you'll be taken to this pending task list. And here you can see this risk assessment pending task for our training organization. Before I jump into that, wanted to also show you a little bit how the system is organized. So you've got your home tab here, and this home tab gives you some overall functionality for you to access. You have access to your pending tasks from here. You have access to your organization profile, which is where your organization level information resides, your organizational level documentation. You can upload that there. This is where your organization level risk assessment is going to live. All of this lives on your organization profile. And then the rest of these modules, the rest of these tabs, these coincide with the grants management lifecycle. So the opportunities module here is the module you'll go into when LMG publishes an RFA or an RFP, right? An announcement or a funding opportunity. You'll go to this opportunities tab in order to review any published opportunities that you're interested in. And this is where you'll start your applications to apply for funding. The applications module is to manage the applications that you've started or submitted. So as you are interested in various funding opportunities published by LMG, you'll start applications from the opportunities module, and then that will transition you into the applications module as you work on your draft application, submit it, and then it goes through LMG's application review process. The next module is the grants module. So once LMG reviews your application, if they've determined that you're going to get funding, LMG is going to be drafting a grant for you. And once you have that grant drafted and you start to enter into that agreement, you'll be managing your grant here in this grant module. That includes the grant and subaward, and it includes any amendments that need to be taken care of as well, such as no cost extensions or budget redirections where you might need to move money from one budget category to another. There's various types of amendments that the system supports, and all of those amendments will also be handled here in this grants module. The monitoring module is where you're going to take care of your post-award monitoring activities. So this is where you're going to be submitting progress reports. This is where you're going to be working with LMG on site visits and desk reviews in order to monitor compliance. This is where you're also going to be submitting your reimbursement requests, which we'll cover in a different training session. But the monitoring module you'll be spending a lot of time in, because after your grant is active and as you're doing the work, you obviously need to get paid for doing that work. So this is where you'll be submitting those reimbursement requests. LMG obviously requires you to report on your progress. So this is where you're going to be submitting progress reports. And when LMG goes to perform their monitoring activities like technical assistance and site visits, this is where they will report on those activities as well. Then finally, there's the closeout module here, where as the grant lifecycle comes to an end, we need to close the grant out. This is where that closeout process is going to happen. You can see in this case, I've got a lot of blank tables. Again, this is a brand new organization. I just registered this morning, so everything's nice, fresh. There's no grants with this organization yet or anything like that. So that's why you're seeing a lot of blank tables here. So coming back to the home tab here, let's go ahead and start our risk assessment pending task. So we'll go to our pending tasks list here. And then to go ahead and get started on that task, you'll just click the start icon here. And that will take you right to the record that you need to work on. So that way you don't need to go to your organization profile and then go and find it. It'll just take you right there. Now, once you're inside a record in GovGrants in general, there's a few common tabs that you're going to see throughout the system. You're always going to see a header of some sort, which tells you what module you're in. It gives you an ID, so that way if you need any help or assistance or anything like that and you need to reach out to LMG, having this ID is really handy because it makes it really easy for them to search for it. This gives you the status, and obviously it just says, hey, it's for your organization. You'll also see a status bar. Most records in GovGrants go through a workflow process. In this particular case, the workflow process is pretty straightforward, where you'll complete the assessment, you'll submit it, it will become active automatically, and then it's good for a year. After that year is done, it will expire. Or if you do an out-of-cycle risk assessment and activate that, that will expire the previous assessment as well for you automatically. And then every record in GovGrants follows this tabular structure. And that just kind of helps keep the information organized. A lot of the records in GovGrants will have this overview tab, which just has basic information in it. In this particular case, it has very basic information in it. What's your organization type? Where are you located? And then we have our assessment tab here, which is the meat and potatoes of this particular record. So we'll go through this in a bit more detail in a bit. Most other records in GovGrants also have this Files, History, and Collab tab. So the Files tab is where you can attach documentation, any supporting documentation, any backup documentation that you need. So in this case, while you're answering the questionnaire to the risk assessment, if LMG requires any backup documentation, you can attach that here in this risk assessment files section by just hitting Add Files, selecting the classification, like what kind of document is this? Is this additional agency details? Is this some other document of some sort? And then you'll select the file from your computer. You can provide a description if you like, and then hit upload. And that's how you'll attach files. And that's the same way all throughout GovGrants. So if there's any backup documentation that LMG requires as part of your reimbursement request, for example, like if they require an invoice or receipts or things like that, you'll attach those the same way. There's also a notes section down here where if there's any additional notes that you would like to add, so additional comments, or if you have questions, any back and forth that you have with LMG or amongst each other, you can add notes here. Notes are not required. They're just here for you if you want them. The history tab has a couple of areas here. History tabs typically show a few different things. And in the case of risk assessment, it shows two things. The first thing is what we call field history. So as you answer the questionnaire or as you update various fields throughout the record, that will be captured in field history. And then when you submit the risk assessment record, the system will automatically take what's called a snapshot. And a snapshot is a PDF version of this record. So that way you can download that snapshot and distribute it if you need to. It's a PDF document basically that has all of the information within the record. Lastly, there's the Collab tab. So this is for collaboration features, and there's a couple of features here. The first feature available is called My Feed. And what this is basically a instant messaging system on a particular record. So you can post messages here, and the message will live here on the record. So that way anyone else who accesses the record can see your post. You can also mention people in particular. And when you mention a person, that mention will appear on their My Feed area on their home tab. So you can mention people in particular using the @ symbol. And I don't have any other users on this organization, so nothing's going to show up. But if you have additional users in this organization, you'll be able to mention them in particular. So that way it shows up in their My Feed on the homepage. So it's just a nice instant messaging system. These messages live on the record that they're for, so that way they don't get jumbled up, because over the course of time, you're going to have a lot of records in GovGrants. You're going to have one or more grants, you're going to have one or more progress reports, many reimbursement requests. The Collab messages, they live on the record that you posted the message on, making it easier to find them 2, 3, 4 years later. The second area is this messages area. This is an area that allows you to send an email from GovGrants out to anyone whose email address you have. So you have your to, you have your CC, your subject, your body, you can attach files as well. It will send an email from GovGrants to whatever emails you put in the to and CC. The cool thing about this though is that when someone replies to that email will be captured and stored here in GovGrants as well. So that way you maintain the entire chain as it pertains to this particular record. So if you send a question out to LMG, for example, that email that you send from here will be captured in the table. When LMG responds back to that email, that response will also be captured in this table. Because if you're anything like me, you've got a billion emails in Outlook, and sometimes it's hard to find something, a year or two later. So it's a lot easier when it's all just attached here to a particular record that you're interested in. So those are the common features. You'll see these all over the place in Gov grants, in this training as well as in other trainings as well. So now let's go look at the meat and potatoes. So we've got our assessment tab here, and this is the questionnaire that you'll need to answer. So for every section in the questionnaire, you have a section name and then the maximum score. As part of the risk assessment, we're playing golf. The lower the score, the better. So the maximum score is not what you want to achieve. You want to achieve as low as possible. We don't tell you what the scores are for how you answer the questions because that will, that's a possible influence for cheating. So we only score after you've submitted the questionnaire. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm recovering from a slightly annoying illness. It's all good. So we have some quality of management system questions. We have some financial reporting questions, budget control questions, cost principle questions, audit questions, organizational governance, property standards, procurement standards, subrecipient monitoring and management, fraud, waste, and abuse. So we've got questions in all of these different areas. And I'm not going to go question by question because that's going to take a while, but I'll answer them slowly. That way you can kind of read through everything. And as I'm answering through, if you've got any questions or concerns or anything like that, feel free to ask. So jump in whenever you want. It's all good. So let's start answering the quality of management systems. So here we've got 3 questions. And then you can see that for all of these answers, there's always drop downs, and the drop down values change based on the question. So in this particular case, the question is which of the following best characterizes your organization's accounting system? Are you using an automated accounting system? Was it a accounting system developed in-house or by a consulting firm? Are you not using a automated system or a software system? Are you using manual or spreadsheet driven system? Or is this question not even applicable at all? And then here you can see the options change per question. For financial reporting, our first question is how often does your organization request reimbursement from funding agencies like LMG? And then you've got various options to pick from here. Like they're always submitted in accordance with the schedule. They're sometimes submitted in accordance with the schedule. We're never in accordance with the schedule. Hopefully that's not the case. Up next, we got organization's annual financial statements. Question around that. For budgetary controls, does your organization's accounting or financial process include budgetary controls to prevent incurring expenses in excess of the total funds that are available? Yes or no? Another question as well, yes or no? And then for cost principles, which organizational staff are required to participate in training on the provisions of the federal cost principles? So who's required to be in the trainings for your organization? Is it only your fiscal staff, only your programmatic staff? Is it all your staff or none of your staff? You never conduct trainings. Hopefully that's not the case. But you never know. Got questions around audit, such as has the organization experienced any key personnel changes within the last 12 months? Key personnel would be executive director, COO, CFO, program leadership. If yes, then yes. If no, no. Then we have questions around turnover rate, financial statement auditing, corrective action plans, organizational governments, like are governing body members independent of management? Yes or no? Do you provide your actual revenue and expenditure reports to those governing body members? Are they engaged in audit functions? For property standards, do you maintain an inventory of real and personal property, including equipment purchased with grant funds? Yes, no. And then other property standard questions like, do you have control systems to ensure adequate safeguards? Do you have procedures to ensure that the equipment purchased is excluded from your depreciation calculation? For procurement standards, what percentage of total federal awards are dispersed through procurement of goods and services? When organization contracts include federal funds, do they contain provisions described in the 2 CFR 200? For monitoring and management, do you pass federal funds through to subrecipients? So when you receive funds from LMG, do you continue to pass them through? You have written policies and procedures for your subaward management as per the 2 CFR 200. And then finally, fraud, waste, and abuse, which is hopefully not an issue for anybody. These are pretty serious. But how frequently is fraud awareness training provided? Hopefully it's provided pretty frequently. And then how frequently is ethics and standards training provided? Hopefully it's also provided relatively frequently. Finally, once you're done answering all the questions, you need to check this acknowledgement box to basically acknowledge, agree that all of your answers to the question are true and honest based on your own experience, based on your own knowledge. So it's just certifying that you're doing the best you can. And from there, we've gone ahead, we saved it. So now we can see all of our answers here. One thing I do want to note before we submit is in the system in general, you're going to see a couple of icons throughout. For all these questions, you see this little warning icon. That little warning icon means that this is a field that's required to submit. So if you don't have the question answered, let's say that you fill half the questionnaire and you need to go do something else, you're not able to finish it right now, you can save it without having it completed. That's okay. But if you're missing the answer to a question, you're not going to be allowed to submit it. It's going to fire validation on you to prevent you from submitting it because you're missing an answer to a question. So you can save your progress, but you can't submit an incomplete form. So let's go ahead and re-answer this question, save that. And then if you see a red asterisk instead of a yellow warning, that red asterisk indicates that it is a field that's required to save the record. So if you don't provide an answer to those red asterisk questions, then you're not going to be able to save it because the system needs that information in order to run calculations and things like that. You won't run into those types of fields here because the risk assessment is just a simple questionnaire. But for things like reimbursement requests or for other things where other calculations are involved, some fields are required to save in order to ensure that those calculations are done properly. And that's basically it. Let's go ahead and submit. The system's going to go ahead, take the questions and score them. And now you can see at the end of every section, you have your score here. So you can see here I scored a 9 out of 18, so not great. Scored a 2 out of 10, that's pretty good. 2 out of 10 is also pretty good. 5 out of 15 is okay. So you can see the score you got for each section. So you can potentially pinpoint areas of improvement, right? If you're noticing you got a really high score in a particular area. In this case, it looks like I answered it pretty well. So this seems like it's a pretty low scoring risk assessment, which is great. But if you have any areas that have a high score, that's an area where you might want to look for improvement. And you can work with LMG in that. When you go back to the overview, you'll now be able to see that the overview tab is updated with your score. So you have your overall score in a percentage out of 100 here. Again, the lower the score, the better. So 27% risk percent. And then that gives you a risk level, green for low, yellow for moderate, and red for high. And then if you hover over this information icon here, you can kind of see the ranges for low, medium, and high. So if you're lower than 35% risk, that's low risk. If you're between 35 and 65% risk, that's medium or moderate. And if you're higher than 65%, you're high risk. So in this case, we did pretty good. We're at that low risk area. And then if you go back to your organization profile by either clicking this up here or going to the left menu, there's usually multiple ways to navigate around in GovGrants, whichever is more intuitive. You click this up here, go back to your organization profile. And in the risk assessment tab of your organization profile, you can see the same information here. So you can see your overall risk from an organization perspective. And you can see this is your organization risk assessment that we just completed. Here's that button to request a new out-of-cycle assessment if you need to. And then when LMG does sub-award level risk assessments, you'll be able to see those listed out down here as well. So you'll be able to monitor those from your organization profile rather than needing to navigate to every subaward that you've ever had with LMG to find a particular one. So as we get into the subaward portion of this training, we'll do a risk assessment there, and I'll show you what that looks like. But yeah, so that's the organization level risk assessment. Any questions or concerns there?
David, could you tell everybody who has to complete the risk assessment, which user has to complete it?
Right. So as far as who has to complete the risk assessment, the pending task is assigned to that primary user who registered the organization. The way that the permission sets typically work in Gov grants is that when an assignment is done for your organization, the assignment is almost always given to that primary user. That doesn't mean that they have to fill the record out, but it does mean that they have to submit it. So if you invite secondary users to assist, the secondary user can go in and they can fill the record out and save it. But that primary user who is assigned the pending task, they have to be the one to submit it. And that ensures that any records that are submitted in Gov grants that LMG have access to, that they were authorized by a authorized representative of your organization. It's not just submitted by, by random Joe off the street. Pull up the chat. I should have pulled that up earlier just to see if there's any questions in chat. Okay, I don't see any. Any other questions or concerns from anybody? All right, awesome. Here in the PowerPoint, I've also got the workflow for subaward level risk assessment. I'll go over that when we go into the subaward itself, since those tie together. So I'm going to hold off on this for a little bit. I'll come back to it once we go through the grant process. So with that, Susan, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, David. I'm going to stop the recording for just a second.
Mm-hmm.